Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for attending this meeting of the Planning Committee on Thursday, the 10th of October. My name's Caleb Tomlinson. I am the Ward Councillor for Bamber West, and I am the chair of this committee. Committee members and members of the public, you're reminded that this meeting is being streamed live and sent to YouTube. All right, voting will be undertaken by the electronic voting system. The outcome of the vote will then be confirmed by our legal officer, Liz, once complete. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you.
I'll begin with some housekeeping. Please put your phones onto silent. Okay, we're not anticipating a fire alarm drill tonight, but if the alarm does go off, we usually go through there, so we'll have to knock them barriers down. We'll go through into the wheel room and out onto the car park. Okay, before we do introductions this evening, I'd like to welcome Councillor Peter Gabbert to the committee, and also Councillor Peter Pillinger, who hasn't done his training, so he's been subbed this evening. Okay, if I can now ask everyone to introduce themselves, starting to my left and going round one by one.
Liz Walsh. Liz Walsh, Legal Services Team Leader.
Claire Gornall, Democratic Services Officer.
Evening Chair, Wesley Roberts, Councillor for Buckshire and Wood, and substitute tonight for Councillor Pete Billinger.
Chris Lomax, Walton-le-Dale East.
Councillor Phil Smith, I represent New Longton and Hutton East.
Good evening, Councillor David Shaw representing Howick and Priory in Penwitham.
Peter Gabbert, Councillor for Gloucester.
Sir John Rangesbury for Hull, substitute for Peter Molling at Castlemaine.
I'm Keith Martin, elected member for Middlefirth, and I'm representing Hayden Williams.
Good evening, Councillor Mary Green, Councillor for Moss Side and Midge Hall.
Good evening, Councillor Elaine Stringfellow for Lostock Hall Ward.
Good evening, Chris Sowerby, Development Planning Team Leader.
Good evening, Debbie Roberts, Development Management Team Leader.
And also joining us at some point will be Lizzie Hindle, Head of Planning and Enforcement. Okay, so we've had apologies. Each person has said so. You're okay with that one, Claire? So on tonight's light planning committee meeting, do we have any declarations of interest? We don't. Good. Have we all read the minutes of the last meeting? I've been fully informed. I watched the meeting on a balcony in Malaga. It was beautiful. It was the nicest planning committee meeting I've ever attended. So I'm quite happy to sign those off. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Stringfellow, thank you very much, and thanks for chairing for me that night. Okay, I don't think we have any appeal decisions. That was the case last.
Yeah, none to report. Thanks, Chair.
Nothing to report. Okay. So let's move swiftly on then to item number 6. It's the test track, Alston Way, Leyland. And Chris Sowerby, if you would like to introduce this item, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The application relates to a 1.4 hectare parcel of land located centrally within the employment phase of the wider test track development. The master plan, approved under the 2017 hybrid application on the wider site, details employment uses on the site with a green buffer area along the southern and the western boundaries. Details of acoustic fencing and bunding within the residential phase along the boundary with the employment phase were approved in 2018 as part of this wider outline permission. The master plan was also approved under the 2021 hybrid application, which related solely to the employment phase, which again included a green buffer area. The site is bounded to the south and west by consented future residential phases on the test track development, and sections of the Moss Side Industrial Estate are present to the north and the east. Across Upper and Lower Tyton, 70 light commercial units were approved under the previous 2021 application, which excluded the site subject to this application, which you can see centrally there. The development is to be served from accesses onto Aston Way and Tyton Way. The approval includes landscape buffer and sustainable drainage systems along the western and the southern boundaries. Reserve matter approval is being sought for 27 commercial light industrial units in varying sizes within 5 blocks. Block GI is to be served from the east via the approved access onto Tyton Way through Lower Tyton, and the remainder of the units are to be served from the north via an approved access from Aston Way, which also serves Upper Tyton. Each unit is to have dedicated parking and delivery areas. An update sheet has been circulated referencing an updated landscaping plan that has been provided to reflect the changes to the internal highway layout requested by LCC Highways. This includes improved pedestrian connectivity between Mid and Lower Tyton and improved visibility onto the highway to the east of Block I. I'll just try and get my pointer just to show you whereabouts that is. This area here. Proposed light industrial units range between 7 and 8.2 metres in height and would all be constructed in a similar design to with the use of grey composite cladding. There are no objections to the proposal from any of the statutory consultees. The application accords with the relevant planning policies and the approved master plans. For these reasons and those contained within the report, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the imposition of conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for your presentation, Chris. Okay, we have 2 registered speakers on this item. You will each have 4 minutes to make your presentation. Councillor Michael Green, the ward councillor, if you'd...
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, fellow councillors. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. I'm not going to take up much of your time, actually. I support the application before you this evening in terms of the employment opportunities it will no doubt bring to residents both in Moss Side and Mid Joel area and wider across South Hibble. There will be opportunities hopefully for local residents in terms of jobs and apprenticeships, etc. I also support the conditions which have been set out in the report, which deal with a number of issues. I note there have been no objections from statutory consultees, nor have there been any objections from members of the public. However, there are no neighbours to this site at present. And one thing which I would draw your attention to is obviously at some point in the future, there will be residential properties neighbouring this site. And I think that's something which we need to have due regard to. To that extent, I'm just wondering whether the bunding is sufficient. I'm wondering whether there's anything further that can be done in terms of screening the site. I note that there have been some improvements in that regard, and the heights of the properties are not as high as they could clearly have been. But nevertheless, there is reference to the fact that they will be visible from the residential properties. I'm just wondering whether members can consider whether there's anything further that can be done to separate what will be hopefully a very pleasant residential area from what will equally be a pleasant employment area, but we can keep that separation between the employment and the residential areas. I think that would be appreciated, but I'll leave it with yourselves as experienced members to see how that can be dealt with accordingly. But otherwise, in principle, I am in support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Green. You do still have 2.5 minutes left if you want to use them. Are you sure? All right, thanks for that, Mike. Councillor Green, thank you. Right, we have the applicant's agent, Edward James. Once again, Edward, you have 4 minutes, okay.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning Committee. I am here today as the planning agent to speak in support of this reserved matters application within the employment phase of the former Leyland test track. The application relates to the middle section of the employment phase, of which the upper and lower parts have already received reserved matters planning permission in April 2022. The proposals within this application comprise over 5,000 square metres of employment floor space. This is coupled with the existing permissions at the upper and lower parts of the employment phase, totalling over 16,000 square metres. The design of the buildings are of a high quality for their employment use and replicate the design code approved as part of the former reserved matters application. Furthermore, a rich landscaping scheme has been proposed and again seeks to tie in with the previous approval within the employment phase. As part of the application's determination, amendments were made to satisfy comments from Lancashire County Council Highways, including pedestrian and cycle routes and accesses. Subject to planning conditions, the remaining consultees had no objections. Overall, the application forms part of a wider strategic site allocation and includes employment floor space that is key to the council's delivery targets. Thank you.
Well, Edward, thanks for your presentation. Right, straight away, I am going to open to committee. Councillor Martin, followed by Councillor Mrs. Green.
I was just going to ask, Councillor Green mentioned the bunding and stuff like that. Are there any houses planned for there that have gone through yet?
Yes, all the residential phases have been approved. The nearest residential from that boundary is about 30 metres. So you have the bunding in place, you have the landscape buffer, and then you're into the side, is predominantly the side elevations, blank side elevations of these units. Now, the use of the units is restricted to office light industrial, and that use class by definition is appropriate in residential areas. So we're not talking about general industrial here. It is a use which is appropriate by definition in residential areas. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I think given that information, I'd like to move proposal because it's just reserved matters and things can be sorted out as they go along, I'd imagine. So thank you.
Okay, so that's proposal for approval. Councillor Mrs. Green.
Thank you, Chair. Mostly really, Councillor Green's highlighted the only problems really that I've noted in the report. I just think basically it's if we could tighten up as much as we can the conditions that are already in, that have been put in, but I feel that they need really, really tightening extra. For instance, you know, on policy G17 on page 15, it says new buildings to take account of the character and appearance of the local area. It's a very rural area down there, believe it or not, at this side. That side's more industrial. So it needs to fit in as a backdrop with the houses that are going to be nearest to those industries. As Chris has said, on page 16, it says that this block G, which we're discussing this evening, is 30 metres away from the residences. Now, I know in the past, I don't really like quoting past developments, but the Dr. Etker and the Caddick sites on Croston Road were all stated at the time of planning that they were going to have substantial buffering, tree planting, landscaping, etc., to soften the impression of the concrete buildings. Unfortunately, those haven't happened. And the residences there are sat looking at these staunch, white, concrete industrial units. So this is what I mean. There's no use putting whips, little fine trees in to buffer. We need substantial trees to cushion the sounds coming from there, if there are any sound, and also the appearance of the building. For people who live there and are sat in the back gardens that don't necessarily want to sit and look at a bleak sort of grey concrete building. So if we could sort of tighten up on that buffering and landscaping, that would help. I've noted that LCC Highways have requested a restriction that there's no HGVs over 16.5 metres allowed in. We need to tighten up on that as well, make sure that that really happens. It's nice to hear that they already sorted the 111 bus to divert through the residential area, because you'll need it down there. And although in the report it says there's been noise assessments and light emissions assessments, again, we need to really, really strengthen those conditions, because at this moment in time, I don't know if you do, but I don't know what units are going in there, what they're going to be used for. So you get things, I know when I'm down Long Minigate near Dr. Etker's, you can hear the reversing vehicles reversing up and down with the bleeping on the reversing aids, which are quite noisy. So if there's anything like that going on down there, which may well be, we need some restriction on times of movement. Not too early in the morning, not too late at night. If it's a unit that's working 24 hours, warehousing or whatever, we need something tightening up on there. And also you get, in the past, I've heard of these refrigerated lorries. They've got to be plugged in and the engines are running because it's got to be kept refrigerated, but they are quite noisy. And depending on what's going in there, you might get refrigerated lorries coming in. So it's just across the board tightening up of the conditions to help the residents as much as possible. I have got one question though. It's mentioned on section 1016. There's droppable bollards are going to be installed on the emergency access road. Now, where is that? Because right, way back when this application was first started, there was a big discussion about access through Paradise Lane into the development. And we actually worked on that to try and get it avoided, because there's a care home down there, there's a school down there, there's excessive traffic at certain times of the day. So the development was put in that there was going to be droppable bollards at the bottom of Paradise Lane. I've then recently heard that instead of these bollards, which could get damaged and be ineffective, that they were thinking of putting, the highways were thinking of putting traffic lights with cameras attached. So if vehicles could go through Paradise Lane and onto the development, but if they do, they would be photographed with the cameras and get a subsequent fine. So after you get done once or twice, it puts you off and you won't go down there anymore. Now, are these droppable bollards mentioned in this report going onto the bottom of Paradise Lane, or is it somewhere else? That's the only question I wanted to know. Thank you, Chair.
Chris, I'll bring you in just to address those comments by Councillor Green, and then I'm going to bring in Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a separate phase from the part of the site that relates to Paradise Lane. That is the local centre phase around there. In essence, what the highways were concerned about is that you have one access into a site and one access out, and if that access is blocked, whatever reason, there is no other alternative access. So those droppable bollards is to just provide that through traffic and have an alternative means of access. If I can just confirm with the agent, is it between the two? Is it to connect the two? Because each section is served by an access point. It is, yeah. But that's the local centre phase, yeah. Yeah. In regards to the height of the buildings in relationship with the neighbours, that's been considered throughout. Well, from the master plan phase. The parameters plan that was approved on the hybrid consent that allowed buildings up to 16 metres in height. I know reference was made to the Dr. Ertker building, the Caddick building. Those buildings are significantly higher than what is proposed before us today. The scale of these buildings, which ranges from 7 to 8.2 metres in height, that is around about the same height as a two-storey dwelling. It's nothing like other industrial buildings within the Moss Side industrial estate, which are a lot higher. It's also important to consider that we already have 70 units of a similar design approved on Upper and Lower Titan. This application relates to 27 units centrally, which are of a very similar appearance and well below the height that was considered to be acceptable on the approval of the parameters plan. So the landscaping, which was approved on the basis of the buildings, could be up to 16 metres in height. In effect, they're only going to be screening buildings which are up to 8 metres in height. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris. You're making some of my points about this. I think it's absolutely admirable that Councillor Green is looking after the potential residents for this area. But as you've said, Chris, the Upper Titan area and the Lower Titan area, if you look at page 10, the graph on page, the graphic on page 10, I would suggest to you that this application site, the middle part of this site, this employment site, it has less impact on the potential housing than any of the other areas in that employment area. Simply by the 30-metre standoff seems to be standard across all of those, but there are actually far fewer houses that are actually likely to be within that sort of distance of these offices and similar buildings. So I'm satisfied on that point. I'm grateful for the comment about the traffic flows, and I think the master plan envisaged some of this, so I don't have a great problem. I'm happy to second the motion.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Shaw. Anyone else? No? Okay, so I've had a proposer for approval. I've had a seconder for approval. Do we have any other proposals? Oh, okay, so if we can go to the vote, this is for approval of the test track, Elston Way, Moss Side and Leyland. Okay, Liz, that's the vote. If you can confirm that.
Members have voted in favour of officer recommendation to approve reserve matters with subject to conditions.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. If you were just here for that application. Okay, we've moved on to agenda item number 7. This is Worden Park, Leyland. The recommendation is that listed building consent, advertisement consent and planning permission should be granted with conditions. And it's over to you, Debbie, to present the item, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Right, we've got 3 applications on this one tonight. They all tie in together, so I'm going to present them together, but we would need 3 decisions, please. We've got 1 for planning permission, 1 for advertisement consent and 1 for listed building consent. You all know Worden Park's a Grade 2 registered park. The planning permission would be for erection of a steel canopy, installation of an air source heat pump, solar panels, wood stove and flue liner. Advertisement consent is 2 parts, 1 for the hall itself and 1 for the rest of the park. And listed building consent is for all of that plus some cosmetic work. So just to run through it, the air source heat pumps, there's no method to this madness. My speech is completely out of order, but the bottom left, the existing oil tank compound to the rear of the glass house, which is south of Worden Hall, will be removed and replaced with an air source heat pump. That'll be screened by a wooden fence, which will also provide some noise abatement. The top right-hand picture, freestanding air source heat pumps installed to both farmyard cottages. The top left plan, it's a little bit vague, but this proposes a freestanding metal and polycarbonate steel canopy. It's about 2.3 metres high and it'll sit behind the little wall near El Tano. Secured by temporary fixing so that it doesn't do any damage to the original fabric, and it shouldn't be too visible. What it's meant to be is to host external use, barbecues, that sort of thing for El Tano. Because they tend to deteriorate, we'd suggest a 3-year temporary permission on that one. And there is also another condition requiring details of any permanent fixings before that happens. And some solar panels on farmyard cottages. The signage scheme is a series of individual door signs to the craft units and some combination communal business advertisement. There are four sections, one on the craft unit, one on the outside wall near the Hall car park, one next to the new extension on the southern approach, and one on the eastern elevation. They'll all be finished in navy blue, copper and brown. That's the Worden Hall livery. And then there's a series of updated signage across the wider park. Same sort of design, but they'll be in green and navy. Listed building consent for everything, apart from some paint colour changes to provide consistency with the 2015 application. Installation of a wood-burning stove and covering up of an existing range. Restoration is way too expensive to do, so we're just covering up and looking after it. No representation, no letter, no comments whatsoever. So we would recommend approval for the planning permission and consent granted for the advertisement and listed building consents. Thanks, Chair.
Right, okay. Obviously, we're just going to open up to committee on this one. Which are we doing first? The advertising, the canopy, or the listed building concept? Pardon? Right, so planning permission. Open to committee, please. Councillor Lomax.
I'm just happy to propose it and move forward.
Okay, so Councillor Lomax has proposed approval. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Roberts, thank you. Okay, so this is planning permission. Yeah. Okay, can we go to the electronic vote, please?
Members have voted in favour of officer recommendation that listed building consent, advertisement consent and planning permission should be granted with conditions.
Okay, so the next vote is on. Well, we just done it on. We've done it on block, have we? So we haven't done 3. Yeah, if you're happy, I'm happy. Okay. Well, no, we don't need to vote again. So that's all 3 have been approved. Right, moving on to agenda item number, Councillor Mrs. Greenwat.
Could I just ask a question? It mentions the paint's Farrow and Ball Elephant's Breath paint. What colour is Elephant's Breath? Like a grey? Ah, I wondered if it was grey. So it's like a grey colour. I just wondered.
It's a much nicer colour than Farrow and Ball's cow dung, I assure you. Okay, agenda item number 8. This is for Norton. It's on Lancashire Advanced Engineering Manufacturing Enterprise Zone. And if you have read the whole report, I congratulate you sincerely. Over to you, Debbie.
I'd like to expect you all to have read it, since it took us a long time to write. But the report, as Chair says, refers to revised local development order, master plan, and there is an accompanying transport assessment relating to Lancashire Enterprise Zone at Samlesbury. These documents will be used for council officers for development management purposes in South Ribble and Ribble Valley. We will adopt separate, or we hope to adopt separate documents, but they are identical and they'll be adopted on the same day. Excuse me, the borough boundary runs through the middle of the enterprise zone. That's why we're both involved. The item is for noting only. The decision to adopt will be taken to Cabinet on the 16th of October. Enterprise zone, they're laughing, I can't help it when they're laughing at the side of me. Enterprise zone status was first granted in 2011. We had a local development order and master plan in 2014. They both expired in February of this year, and they've been updated because some of the work's already been done. The highways work, all the sites been scraped, that sort of thing. But some parcels of land remain undeveloped, and the master plan itself wasn't quite fit for purpose for those plots. If it's adopted, the proposed documents will run for 10 years. With a bit of luck, it'll be finished by then. If it's not, it'll be reassessed and we'll look to readopt. But they will conditionally extend the permitted development rights to development within the EZ boundary. Permitted development rights grant permission subject to 16 conditions in this case, without the need to go through the normal planning process. And it sets down the principle of design and development for that site. In Salisbury's case, it centres around advanced manufacturing and engineering, related services and necessary infrastructure. And they're in Schedule A, page 13 of Appendix 4, if you've read it. The enterprise zone itself covers 72 hectares, 72.5 hectares, but there are some restrictions on the individual smaller uses, the minor retail, there's a gym and a nursery proposed on there, and they're referred to in paragraph 132 of the same document. Ribble Valley went to their council on the 8th of October. We don't know what the decision was. Ours is going to Cabinet on the 16th. Thank you, Chair. It's just for noting, please.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. Does anybody have any comments? Councillor Shaw.
The question suddenly occurred to me. We had a quick word before the meeting and it's still been processing through my head. We don't have a huge amount of say on this. Well, we as a committee won't have any say on it, but for example, what criteria are based, what sort of latitude do you give to the applications when you get your 28 days to respond to? So if the nursery doesn't have 75% usage, are we talking about a minimum of 75%, or do we have 75% subject to it being commercially viable? Or and the other sort of and the other sort of area would be how much of the remaining area has to be developed before national highways pull the finger out and redo junction 31?
I can't answer you about the junction 31 because it's a question we've asked as well, without the pull the finger out bit. But the units themselves are the Lancashire Enterprise Partnership determine who goes into the units, and their agreement with the prospective tenants will work that out. This is to set down the stall for it. Any application that comes in is vetted by Lancashire Enterprise Partnership. They decide whether they accord to the types of development that we want on there. So advanced manufacturing, nuclear, that sort of thing. If they pass that hurdle, they can apply for a prior notice, prior of P&D application, one of these applications. And we then go through the 16 conditions. We'll check that the drainage is acceptable. We'll check that the highway work is in. 10 of those conditions have already been completed. So the ecology work's all been done. The highways are all in, apart from access roads into individual plots. But the master plan gives us the height, the maximum style, the type of detail, the landscaping that we expect, and each one's assessed against that basis. But the vetting is done by the LEP first, so that sort of gets them in the door, and then we would look at the things that we normally look at on a planning application, although it is a test of the conditions rather than a planning application balance for us. Yeah, does that make sense?
Except you mentioned nuclear again, and somebody was trying to make a point about the potential use of some of the site for nuclear purposes, and I thought we'd ruled it out.
On the LDO, local development order, there is a list of particular uses, and whilst it refers, and I can't remember the exact terminology, it refers to nuclear use. There are numbers at the side of it, and there are tax and nomenclature numbers to dictate what type of business within that nuclear umbrella that number refers to nuclear research, not nuclear power stations, nuclear use. So it's the people who are looking. There are already people on there doing that. There are people on Matrix Park doing that. But it's not nuclear storage or anything like that. It literally is just the research part of it.
So like medical and crap
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one question before I speak on the subject. There's an area on the that you've sent out today which has got lots of green dots on it, which is not within the development plan area. I'm just I can't remember for the life of me what that is. I know it's part of the
Yeah, that's the
overflow area or something, I think it said.
bit on the bottom right-hand side.
That's right, yeah, quite a large bit. Yeah.
It's the biodiversity mitigation area from the first local development order. The last 10 years, one of the conditions was that we enhanced biodiversity.
Yeah.
If you can see the green stripe bit underneath Zone C, there's a little bit at the side of Zone A, and this bit, the biodiversity net gain areas, biodiversity mitigation areas, they're all done, all in and completed.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I sort of note the cycleways as well, because I mean they get you as far as the Swallow Junction and the 677, but once you get to the 677, you seem to be on your own there with cycling. So I just wondered, why doesn't anyone think cyclists might want to cycle the other way?
The third party in all of this, not to the local development order, but the third party on this is Lancashire County Council. They have worked up this scheme. They worked up the on Worley Road, the new traffic lights that have gone in, the new junction that have gone in, and that's part and parcel. Some of the roadworks hasn't been topped off and finished, so possibly that. There is a cycle route from roughly junction at the old Swallow Hotel. There is a cycle route up from there to the new traffic light junction, and on the other side at Worley Road. So I would imagine they will connect the two when they finish topping off.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. I do remember it now. There was a lot of discussion about this 10, 15 years ago before it actually became a local the development plan, and it was quite an interesting time actually talking about it, and it really is good to see that some of the development has actually come forward and turned into what it's supposed to do, is high quality employment site, and I think that's really, really good, and look forward to see the rest of it come forward in the dueness of time. A bit of advice for the cabinet when it goes to the cabinet meeting, just to make the 400 and odd pages easier to read. If you go to Appendix 1, it's 20 pages, Appendix 2 is 2 pages, Appendix 3 is 25 pages, Appendix 4 is 26 pages, and they could leave Appendix 5 because that's 316 pages. Thank you, Chair.
That is Debbie's finest work, isn't it, Debbie? Debbie's catchphrase is, why use 10 words when I could use 1,000? Councillor Mrs. Green.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just wanted to say that I think it's fantastic development. The fact that it's going to provide 2,500 jobs and potential in the future 5,000-6,000 jobs, all high tech, apprenticeships, plus all the service industries that will be working and getting benefit indirectly from that company as well, you know, because it's like when we had Leyland, you had all the companies that supplied the tyres, the lights, all those extra service units that they'll need to finish this development and that will benefit from it. So I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I think we need to encourage it as much as possible.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Green. Is there anybody else wishing to speak before I end tonight's meeting? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Rainsbury, for subbing this evening. Thanks, Councillor Martin. Thanks, Councillor Roberts. And I hope you enjoyed this first meeting, Councillor Gabbert. The next one will not be anything like this one.